We had a long journey today in Central European countries, and now we are coming closer where we are. We arrived in Hungary by the end of the afternoon, and I have the great honor to start the presentation about Hungary. It will be completed by my colleague Norbert Tribel. Actually, I would like first to thank the organizers for this excellent conference. And also I would like to thank the colleagues, as I'm a little bit home in this university as well, to come to us. I think it was a very interesting research project, but also for me a great chance to meet other colleagues, and I am grateful already for the conversation that we had during the dinner yesterday, and I hope we can continue to work together. I think this is one of the goals also of this kind of research projects. So, as we are to speak about Hungarian symbols, we have decided to divide a little bit the topic in the following way. Norbert will speak about the protection of symbols, and I will speak about their constitutional consecration. So first, I won't give you the whole list of state, national, and community symbols in Hungary. I will only focus on those who appears in the Fundamental Law of Hungary. And secondly, as we are at the end of a long day, I do not have balls like my colleague Dalibor, but I will try to give you some interesting facts, some Hungarian specialties, to say so, about constitutional consecration, about constitutional definition of symbols. So first I would like to speak about a little bit about the definition of, I call them traditional, but we can discuss of course what are traditionals and what are not traditional symbols, because all the symbols are coming with a tradition, with a history. Then I will try to speak about some special symbols that I have to admit I discovered during this project, as I've read a lot about symbols in Hungary. And finally, if I have time, I would like to speak a little bit about the relation to history, because I think that there is an important symbolism behind that. Dalibor started with history, I will finish with history. But I'm not related to a department of history of law, sorry. So, for the definition of traditional symbols, I have no pictures, unfortunately, but I have quotes from the Fundamental Law. You have, of course, coat of arms. I won't read the text. And you have the flag. One interesting fact about the flag, that we also have an explanation about what the different colors are standing for. So I think it's something very interesting, and I have read some really interesting articles about what can be the normative content of such a constitutional article. Also, it's interesting because scholars are not always agreeing about the origin of those colors. For most of them, they are, of course, symbols, as you read of those different characters, but also coming from the coat of arms, because those are also the colors in our coat of arms. Anyway, we have this explanation in the Fundamental Law, as you read, strength, loyalty, and hope for our colors. Also, we have another Hungarian specialty, an interesting paragraph in our Fundamental Law, which gives some flexibility to the use of the coat of arms and the flag. As you can read, it can be used in other historically developed forms as well. I think Norbert will speak a little bit about these other forms that we can also use, even though we have a constitutional definition of those traditional state symbols. Then, to continue quickly with other traditional symbols, after the coat of arms and the flag, we have, of course, the national anthem. It's not so complicated to have a constitutional definition. I told you I won't speak about the origin, but what is interesting with our national anthem, that actually, as maybe you know, we have two of them. And only one of them is written in the Constitution, but it's not a problem to use also another famous poem entitled Szózat of Vörösmarty, also as a second anthem, so also a national symbol, but by costumes and not by constitutional regulation. Also, we have, of course, the national holidays. So we are in a next article of the fundamental law. As maybe also you know, we have 3 national holidays. And which is interesting, I think, in the constitutional definition of those national holidays, that we also have the explanation in the constitutional text. And this will be already something that I will try to discuss in my last and third chapter about the relation to history. So I think that fundamental law, but I will speak a little bit more about it by the end of my contribution. I think that for the fundamental law of Hungary, history is very important. And history can play an important symbolic role as well, as there is a historical narrative made by our fundamental law. To continue quickly, we have also, I call them special symbols, because I found some very interesting articles discussing about whether or not those can be considered as symbols. But what is sure that they are defined by the Constitution, and most of scholars that I've read consider them also as symbols. We have, first of all, the name of the country. Actually, it was also a question of discussion when the fundamental law was adopted, because it's not with the form of the state that actually the constitutional text, the fundamental law, defined the name of our country, as it says, but it is a general verbing, so it is Hungary. And for most of the scholars, the reason is not because of course, we haven't changed the form of state or government, but this is because it has also a symbolic meaning, as it should represent the continuity of Hungarian statehood, and that's why it was important for the declaration in the Constitution. It's interesting because if you look on other constitutions, there are this kind of symbol for the name of the country, but also it can be with the form of government. I mean, for example, French Republic has also a symbolic meaning, but over there the question was to really show the rupture in the history. So we had Ancien regime and then the Republican regime. For Hungary, it was the opposite. We call it Hungary to symbolize the continuity. Another interesting fact is about Hungarian language and Hungarian Sign Language. Many scholars consider also that the constitutional consecration of those means that they can be also considered as a symbol. Hungarian language, but we have heard just Dalibor, so it helps me to be a little bit shorter. The specialty, the unicity of the Hungarian language makes it a symbol. Also, you can read in the national avowal. I don't want it to put all the constitution on my slides, but if you look for our constitutional preamble, you can also read that for the constitutional text, the unicity, the unique character of the Hungarian language is very important, and they have also added, when they were writing the constitution, the Hungarian Sign Language, which means that it is at the same level considered as a unicity and as that important symbol of national identity. Even more interestingly, we can read in our fundamental law that the official currency of Hungary shall be the forint. And it was also a huge theme, a question for many discussions when the fundamental law has been adopted, because as you know, Hungary is a member state to European Union, and we made this international engagement when we became a member of the European Union to become one day, of course there are no deadline for that, a member of the Eurozone. So of course when it will come, we had to change the fundamental law. And anyway, in a global financial market, why it's interesting or why it's important to constitutionally declare official currency, to put such an article in the fundamental law. And many scholars agreed that it is also because of the symbolic role of a national currency. As you know, I don't want to go to further details about history, but as you know, the question of currency was always closely related to the national sovereignty. So it's also a sign of national independence, and as such, this article is mainly symbolic for most of the interpreters of our fundamental law. So those were some special articles in our fundamental law that can have a symbolic role, and I thought that it was interesting to discuss a little bit about those as well for this conference. And now I will come to the most complicated part of my presentation by the end, the relation to history. And actually, when I prepared my presentation, I was not aware that it will be an interesting question today. As a new amendment, maybe you know, to fundamental law has been presented yesterday to our National Assembly. And actually, this amendment is partly related to the question, what is our relation to history? And it can be, of course, a scientific question, an academic question for a historian to discuss for historiography, but it can be also a constitutional question. And I think that there is a difference between those two. I mean, fundamental law, for fundamental law, it was very important to give a historical narrative, and I think that this historical narrative, a special lecture of the history, has a very important symbolic role. So I've tried, I know I don't have many time left, but I tried to give you a few examples about those historical events, historical facts, that have been put in light by the fundamental law to symbolize something. It can be, of course, different thing. It can be, as usual, the continuity of the state, the foundation of the state, which is an important historical event, of course, but for the Constitution, it can be even more important. And it is also symbolic because it's also a question, not only the foundation of a statehood, but a question of choice of values at the same time. And it is in that way that our fundamental law speaks about that. Then there is, sorry, I didn't tell you because I wanted to go fast, but those are not articles, but those are different sentences from the preamble, from the national avowal. Then there is this idea of the fight for independency, which comes back also more times in our fundamental law. And the last question, which is not really symbolic for me, but for some scholars it has also symbolic meaning. This is for me a more constitutional, material constitutional question. But of course there is this question with the continuity and with the rupture, with a renewal, with a new constitutional regime. And I think that historical narrative is also important for fundamental law in order to play with these two ideas in a very interesting and very strong way, because on one hand we have this idea of the continuity of statehood, which can be very important, and it has once again a material constitutional meaning, for example, with those achievements of historic constitution. And on the other hand, of course, there is this question of the 20th century, a new beginning, which was after the regime changed. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I could respect the time frame.